So, have you ever thought about how the same century that gave us airplanes and antibiotics also gave us two world wars and this deep sense of anxiety? We love to think of history as a straight line, always going up, always getting better. But for the 20th century, wow, the story is way more complicated than that. So, how do we make sense of a time that was so brilliant and so brutal all at once? Let's get into it.
Right at the heart of it, according to the analysis of A.C. Ward, is this massive contradiction. On one side, you've got this incredible accelerating mastery over the physical world. I mean, we were becoming like gods with technology. But on the other side, a total collapse, a relapse in our moral and spiritual certainty. This is the central puzzle we're going to try and solve today.
And that really is the million-dollar question, isn't it? How could these two things happen at the exact same time? How did we get so good at building things, but it seems so bad at knowing what they were for? To even begin to understand that, we have to rewind the clock a little, back to the world that came right before. Okay, so picture the Victorian world of the late 19th century as this big, solid, beautiful house. The people living inside felt completely safe. They believed that house was built on foundations that weren't just strong, they were eternal. They truly thought their world was, the final, perfected version of human civilization. The first pillar holding up this house was the home. The family wasn't just important. It was seen as the perfected, final form of social organization. It was the bedrock. The second pillar? The empire. For the Victorians, there was this solid, almost unquestionable belief that the British Empire was permanent, that its role in the world was fundamentally right and just. And the third pillar holding it all together was religion. Christianity was an absolute certainty. As Ward puts it, the Victorian mind wasn't built to question these things. It was wired to accept and affirm them. And this is the part you really gotta get. The Victorians didn't just think their way of life was good, they believed it was final. The home, the empire, the church, these weren't just a work in progress. No, they were the finished article, set in stone forever. It's a world built on stability and authority. But then, right at the turn of the century, a new generation of thinkers shows up. And they didn't just come to admire the house, they brought hammers. Writers like George Bernard Shaw and H.G. Wells started swinging away at the very foundations of that Victorian certainty. What we're seeing here is a complete 180 in how people thought. The Victorian way was to accept, to affirm, to trust authority. The new 20th century way? To do the complete opposite, to question everything, to test every single assumption, to take absolutely nothing for granted. This quote from Shaw's play just nails the new argument. The character is basically yelling, hey, why are we so logical about our technology, always scrapping the old for the new? But when it comes to our ideas about morality and society, we treat them like they're sacred and can't be touched. It's a fantastic point. But all this questioning had a huge impact. For some people, it felt like opening a window in a stuffy room. It was liberating. But for others, like the character who says this, it was absolutely terrifying. I mean, imagine the rock you stood on your whole life just crumbles beneath your feet. What do? It left a huge spiritual vacuum. Now, this massive intellectual earthquake didn't just stay in the realm of ideas. It ripped right through the arts. And literature, which for so long had been this common ground for everyone, suddenly split right down the middle. Ward actually points to a single year as the breaking point, 1922. This is the year James Joyce publishes Ulysses and T.S. Eliot publishes The Waste Land. Suddenly, high literature takes this sharp turn into being dense, complex, almost deliberately difficult. It basically went from being in the public square to hiding out in what Ward called an esoteric fastness, a fortress of complexity. So you basically had two camps. On one side, you have the old guard, writers who believed they were writing for any intelligent person who wanted to pick up a book. But then you have the new guard, the modernists, who were very consciously writing for a tiny, highly educated, intellectual elite. And this wasn't an accident, it was a philosophical choice. T.S. Eliot himself came out and defended this new, difficult kind of art. He totally rejected the idea that great art had to be easy for everyone to get. He argued that this super intellectual stuff was deeply connected to life, even if only a handful of people could ever really understand it. Okay, so while the highbrow intellectual world was splintering off, the rest of the social world was going through its own radical change. This really kicked into gear after World War II, with the rise of the welfare state. The big idea,
The dream behind the welfare state was this concept of the common man. It was this notion, pushed by guys like H.G. Wells, that the whole point of society should be to protect and uplift the average, ordinary person.
But according to Ward's analysis, the reality turned out different. The ideal of the unique individual common man got replaced by the reality of the mass man. The individual kind of got lost in this new world of mass production, mass media, and mass consumerism. The focus shifted from the person to the crowd. And this is where things get really weird. There's this huge paradox. The promise was that if you give people material security, jobs, safety nets, all of it, you'll get a happy, harmonious society. But what the author observed was not that. Full employment seemed to come with this simmering discontent. Social security for all existed alongside rising crime. And having money didn't bring contentment. It just brought this frantic chase for the next status symbol.
And these were the symptoms Ward saw everywhere in this new, wealthy society. A deep contempt for authority, a culture that celebrated youth rebellion, a new love for being loud and public instead of quiet and reserved. In a way, that spiritual vacuum left behind when the old certainties crumbled was now being filled up by shopping and mass media.
So, after all that, where are we? We've watched the solid Victorian house of certainty get knocked down, and we've walked through the complicated, messy world that was built in its place. What's the takeaway? What did this century of unraveling leave behind for us?
And in the end, it all comes back to that first paradox we talked about. The 20th century's greatest achievement was total mastery over the physical world. But its greatest tragedy, in this view, was that it lost the map, the moral and spiritual compass for how to use that power. And what we were left with was a world richer and more powerful than ever before, but also more anxious and unstable.
Now, this analysis was written back in the middle of the 20th century, but it leaves us with a huge question for right now. Ward saw a world that had lost its anchor and was just adrift. Decades later, as we try to figure out our own crazy world, have we found a new rock to stand on, or are we still just floating on the waves of that same inheritance?